Welcome to the North Star, a space for candid conversations on leadership, equity, and justice. This season, we highlight the people and practices shaping Oberlin's 200-year legacy of inclusion, justice, and excellence. I'm Dr. JeffriAnne Wilder, Executive Director of Oberlin Center for DEI Innovation and Leadership. And today, we have Dr. Alicia Smith-Tran, Associate Professor of Sociology and Comparative American Studies. Alicia Smith-Tran is simply extraordinary. She is an Oberlin alumna, former varsity women's basketball player, and a Mellon Mays Fellow. Alicia embodies the scholar-athlete spirit that has defined Oberlin. Her research explores illness narratives, racism and ageism intersections, Black women in white spaces, sociology of sport, and teaching innovations. And she has published in top journals like Context, Sociological Perspectives, and the journal Autoethnography. And it is always such a pleasure to have a fellow woman of color and especially a fellow sociologist. So Alicia, welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for that kind introduction. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Absolutely. I can't wait for us to dig into this conversation. The first thing I'd like to actually have you share, I love an origin story. I say that a lot on this podcast. And so if you could just kind of walk us through, I know there's a lot to unpack here when it comes to your story about just sort of being a student at Oberlin to now being a professor at Oberlin. So if you could just walk us through all of that, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, I love an origin story too. This is narrative research, right? But I'm not
Yes.
used to actually sharing my own. I'm usually listening to other people. Okay, so my Oberlin story. I was thinking about this yesterday in preparation for this, and my first visit to Oberlin, I was in 8th grade, which is really crazy. My dad decided to take me to visit a college in 8th grade, but I did not like school. I was just middle school is rough, but I always felt I grew up in a predominantly white area. I just did not really like school, did not like my school, was not interested, but loved basketball. And so my dad had this idea like, let me take her to a college where maybe she would like to go one day and see what she thinks. And I was like, what is this little town? Like, where are we going? Down this long highway to the middle of nowhere. We went to a basketball game. I think we went to the Fev, and I was like, okay, like I might be interested in trying to play basketball someday in college. So then fast forward, and my dad took me to visit several other places. I knew I wasn't going to play at a major Division 1 school or anything like that. The Division 3 made a lot of sense. Visited other places, came back to Oberlin. I was like, no, this place is in the middle of nowhere. Like, there's nothing to do here. Like, I want the big city. But something about it, I don't know. I kept coming back to this little school in Ohio. It's like, let me do it overnight. Let me just try it out. So I ended up staying with a couple players on the basketball team, spent a couple days with them. There was another prospective recruit who was there the same weekend who was now one of my best friends. The two women that I stayed with, this is in 2005. They're some of my closest friends in the world. So, anyways, I was convinced once I actually got a taste of student life. And, it was one of the more diverse places I had been, frankly. And so being a student at Oberlin, I had a really great experience as a student athlete. I lived in what was then called Third World House. It's called, I think, Price Hall now, but at the time it's the dorm right next to African Heritage House. And so we were always doing programming together, but it was basically all or mostly students of color, students who are the first in their family to go to college, LGBT students. It was like a bunch of marginalized students together living in this community. And we had this really great space. It was really safe. Everyone could bring their full selves there. Like my closest friends in the world are from Third World House and the women's basketball team. And I just had such a great experience. Doing Mellon, I was like, I love interviewing people. I love learning stories. I don't know if being a professor is for me, but it was an interesting experience getting to talk to people and learning more about qualitative work. But decided I'm not going to go get a PhD because that's too much school anyways. And I think I always had a bit of imposter syndrome, like, Even though I had a great experience, I was like, I don't know that I really am smart enough to be at Oberlin. I think I felt that my whole time that I was here, frankly. Yeah, I really felt that the whole time, the whole time I was
The
here. Like
whole time?
yeah, I think so. Like in my classes, like I didn't speak in my classes. Like I didn't, my grades are pretty good, but I just could not get past like, this is such a smart school. And like, I'm doing fine, but like most people are much smarter than me. Like I can't go get a PhD. Anyway, so I went and got a master's in journalism, which was an awesome experience. Learned so much about interviewing and writing and storytelling and all that stuff. I interned in New York City. I worked as a reporter in Rochester, New York at a newspaper. And then I was like, I did kind of like sociology a lot. I kind of miss that. I kind of miss being able to tell stories in more detail than I can do in a little newspaper article. So I went and got a PhD at Case. I remember telling some faculty at a conference, like, I would love to work somewhere like Oberlin. Like, I had such a great experience there. And they're like, don't tell people that. You know, the thing, like, you need to work at a R1. Like, you don't,
Yes.
do not tell people. It was actually a Black woman faculty member at a conference, like, don't tell people you want to do that. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. But I still had it in the back of my mind. Went through grad school, got a position at a university in Texas, and I had a really good experience there. But then the position opened up at Oberlin, and they reached out to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I never thought that would happen. But it was like full circle that getting to come back here and be a faculty member and teach medical sociology, which is the class I wish we had when I was here. I did a private reading on sociology of health because we didn't have that at the time with Clovis White, whose office I'm in now. So there's just a lot of full circle, yeah, moments that I still have that are just awesome. But it's really good to be back here, and it feels like, I don't know, another home to me being at Oberlin.
Oh my gosh. There's so many things I want to unpack in your origin story.
Sure.
So the first thing I'll say is that I have an eighth grader right now, and I am absolutely, and we've already been talking about it. Absolutely going to take her on college visits because it is definitely the right thing and the right time to be doing because that's
Mm-hmm.
when you pique their interest. And so, when you said that, it resonated with me. Like she is definitely not interested in Oberlin. I've already tried. So,
Gotta get
I'll
away
just
from mom a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, well, that and then like the whole thing about like this weird place in the middle of nowhere, right? She's
Yeah.
definitely a bright light, big city type of girl and
Mm-hmm.
some sun, right? So I think anything in
Yeah.
Ohio is going to be a really tough sell. But the one thing that you said I'd like to sort of drill down a little bit more. So you were a Mellon Mays fellow, and for folks who may not know what that is a fellowship for undergraduate students. Undergraduate students receive funding to become college professors, to pursue their doctorate, to become college professors. And this notion of feeling just this struggling with imposter syndrome your entire 4 years at Oberlin is so fascinating. And not being able to shake this thought of even the entire journey at Oberlin and even being a Mellon Mays fellow, that you didn't really feel smart enough to be here, even though you're continuing to prove, right, to yourself and others that actually you do, right? You do, in fact, belong. And then, of course, I don't know, I've talked at length, and so I won't really go into it. I've talked at length about how sociology doesn't necessarily do us favors around socializing others in the field enough with favorable messages around helping out other sociologists. But what kinds of things do you do now as a professor to help counteract those messages of students now who you might see struggling with belonging, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of how they might look or whatever their social vocation might be. Because I know
Mm-hmm.
that you can see students when they're struggling with that, right? Because you can recognize that, right? I think we all can
Mm-hmm.
if you've ever dealt with imposter syndrome. How do you
Mm-hmm.
work with students right now to sort of counteract that and to sort of diffuse those messages when they're happening in real time?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have explicit conversation. Like, well, I'll say explicitly to some students who are in my office, especially first year students, students of color, my advisees, like, you belong here. They'll say something like, oh, I'm interested in this thing, or I see so and so who is doing research with this professor, but I don't know if that professor would want to work with me. I'm like, well, like you belong in that space too. Like there's no reason you can't send an email to that professor. I'm like, let's look up their email address right now. Let's figure out how you would write that email to that professor, because worst that can happen is they say no, right? But you're not going to know unless you ask. Like you got to put yourself out there. Like you belong there just as much as any other student here, right? We're all just people, right? I very often just share some of what I just shared with you in terms of I was a first year student here wondering like how did I get here? Like, did they let me in on accident? Like, what classes am I actually smart enough to take? Like, should I raise my hand? I just remember having so much anxiety about, I mean, I'm an introvert anyways, but like raising my hand in class, and especially in classes where there like participation was required, I would just be like, oh my gosh, like, how am I going to figure out what I can say? And then someone would say something like, oh, that's what I was going to say. And I'd be like, oh my gosh. And then it's hard to actually focus on what's going on. So even just designing my classes in a way that takes some of the pressure off, not making students talk in class, which I can understand there's arguments for encouraging or requiring students to talk. Like I don't require students to talk, but I will try and get to know every student individually so I can figure out like how can we make sure that you're feeling fully a part of this class and fully engaged, and like how are you feeling? What are you involved in on campus? And just trying to understand where students are at more holistically too. Like anything that I can do and kind of one-on-one conversation or small group conversation or assignments that allow students to bring their own experience into the classroom, I think really helps with, well, I hope helps with making them feel like they belong here and their experience can be part of kind of these scholarly conversations that we're having and kind of bringing the material to life for them. And like you're part of this, like sociology is about you too, and you belong here and you belong in this discipline and in my class. So that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and I know that students are so much the better for it, right? I mean, talk about my experience, absolutely fellow extrovert, or excuse me, fellow introvert here. So I light up in spaces like this, but if I'm just sort of going about my day to day, and certainly as an undergraduate student, and even to a certain extent as a graduate student, as a doc student, I definitely I'm an internal processor, so I'm not necessarily going to be the first person to raise my hand or jump out there and participate. And so I love the thought of incorporating universal design in your teaching approaches. And I know that students are so much better for it. And I know that our students at Oberlin are so much better because you're in the sociology department. So that's really important. What has surprised you the most coming back to Oberlin as a professor? Because I would imagine, and this is just probably my own assumption, but I would imagine that coming back to Oberlin to teach, there's probably a lot of things that you felt that, okay, I know this place. These are my people, right?
Mm-hmm.
What has surprised you the most coming back as a professor?
That's a good question. I think, especially having been a faculty member elsewhere before coming here. So I kind of had a taste of like what it's like being a faculty member, like period, right? So I had gotten over that whole like, oh my gosh, I'm a professor, period thing. And then coming here, I think the thing that shocked me the most in the best way and most challenging way coming back was how much students want from you and how engaged they are.
Yeah.
And that maybe that's not coming out how I want it to come out, but like having office hours be very, very busy, right? And I love that, right? I love it. And also by the end, I'm like, whew, I need a
Yeah.
nap.
Yes. Yes.
That was a lot. That was
Yeah.
like 10 students literally back to back. And I have the best one on one conversations with them, and I absolutely love it. So I think as a student, I didn't fully appreciate truly how much work faculty put into supporting students and being available for students and meeting with them and just doing so many things, being a mentor, being a just a listening ear, being the instructor that's helping with material. Like there's just so many things that faculty are doing with students on a day-to-day basis. And I love that students are genuinely so engaged, right? Like students will come in and like, hi, what do you need? Like, I just want to talk about that reading that we did. Like, oh, okay. And we'll chat for 15 minutes about that. But that was definitely a surprise at first because where I was previously office hours, like that was work time for me. If I had a student come in, I was like, oh, hello,
Yeah.
how can I help you? And now it's busy. There's always students who, who want something from me, not in a bad way, but they're very involved. And I didn't fully appreciate my professors, I think, as a student and how much time they're putting in.
Can we talk about the other side of that coin for a second?
Mm-hmm.
So, as women of color, faculty
Mm-hmm.
members, there's a really, really, really heavy conversation and discourse around emotional labor and the toll that it takes on faculty in general, as you just talked about. But there is a higher level or a higher toll or a higher tax that those kinds of things tend to take on women of color, faculty of color. And to a point where there are a lot of folks who have decided that they are going to transition or exit out of academia altogether.
Mm-hmm.
In my first faculty position out of my finishing my doctorate, not really aging myself, finished my doctorate in 2008 and spent my first faculty position for a decade at the University of North Florida, which is a R2 institution. So neither a research one or a small liberal arts college, kind of in the middle. But for the entire decade I was there as the only faculty of color sociologist, and spent a lot of time doing that, doing a lot of emotional labor. Loved it. It was amazing, totally fulfilling, gratifying, but took a toll, heavy toll. Love teaching, love my research, but it does take a toll. And there's tons of literature, scholarship out there that speaks to that. And so what we have found is that even though there's a ton of fulfillment that folks get from this, and I'm not saying that this is definitely the case for you. I'd just like for us to speak about this more generally, that there is a heavy tax that folks pay for that kind of work. And the tax that they pay is in the form of doing more service work and not being able to ascend to tenure and promotion at the same rate as their counterparts, their male counterparts, or being able to get to administrative positions, or a lot of different sort of consequences that are not great. Can you speak to that? And in the sense of just sort of generally speaking, and also the extent to which you see that happening at Oberlin? And if that's the case, if that doesn't happen, what kinds of things are in place here that protect faculty and particularly women or marginalized communities from having that occur in our
Mm-hmm.
institution?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that resonates. I can
Yeah.
definitely relate to everything that you're saying.
Yeah.
I think when I first started here, I was so excited. I'm still excited, but I was just so excited to be back, right? It was like I was saying yes to everything, right? Plus, you're pre tenure, and I think there's kind of this expectation just in academia in general, right? Like, you don't really say no to things like, and especially at a place like Oberlin where faculty are excited to mentor students. Like, someone would ask me this, I'm like, yeah, I want to help you with that. I want to help you with that. And, if there's a student of color in my office, like, of course I want to support you and do this. Yes, let's have a conversation. But I definitely, you can see this happening, what you're describing, because it is a lot of the same folks, I think, that are often asked to be mentors for the research programs, to speak about X, Y, and Z topic related to diversity on a panel, to be kind of the person that's at the event for prospective students, right? Especially for students of color, right? And so there is kind of this expectation that's kind of an added layer of work, right? Like, not even just the emotional work, but like the literal time spent, right, on faculty of color. So I think when I did not fully realize how much of a toll that and being stretched so thin was taking until I got tenure and had a moment to breathe during sabbatical, that I was like, oh my gosh, like, I am burnt out.
Yeah.
seriously
Burnout.
seriously burnt out, and I had to take a beat. Say, like, okay, I need to learn how to say no. I need to learn how to have boundaries with work. And so I will say that so far, knock on wood, like when I say no to things, like it's okay. And part of that is having the privilege of having tenure and feeling more empowered to say no. But it's challenging, right? Especially when it's a student. Like I can see myself in the student and I want to help them. And then there's another one, and then there's another one. Like that's why I'm here, right? But I think especially as a parent now too, I'm like, my kids are only going to be small once, and I only have so many hours in a day. I only have so much energy. There's also things I want to write. Teaching is important to me. Like I have a life outside of my job too. So trying to balance all those things, but definitely having to learn how to have those boundaries, reading how other people have those boundaries, like going to therapy to learn how to say no and have those boundaries, like all those things. It's been a process for me, but definitely what you're describing I've experienced and resonates. Yeah.
And I also think too, once you create those boundaries, because you're right, no one's going to create those boundaries for you. No is a complete sentence. No is an
Right.
answer, and no one's going to say no for you. Once you learn how to create those boundaries, once you prioritize your care, your rest, you become better at what you do, right? So
Mm-hmm.
once you sort of navigate the pitfalls of burnout, you become a better scholar, you become a better teacher, you become a better person, you become a better parent. That's what I've learned too, is that once I realized that I didn't have to give all of me to being a professor, that it was not necessarily, didn't have to be my primary identity, that I could give more of myself to the other pieces of myself, then I became a better person altogether, right? Then I was able to show up better for other aspects of me, including being a better professor. We got to jump into your research. It is
Mm-hmm.
so fascinating, and it's just really really great. So we've covered your origin story, you as a teacher, how you show up as a professor for others. But walk us through you as a researcher. What excites you sociologically? So I know all the fancy stuff. You and I kind of know that. We know all the lingo sociologically, but let's break it down for our viewers. Can you just kind of walk us through the types of sociological questions that you ask and the things that make you curious sociologically, and what things have you been studying recently? And I know that this whole idea about aging and black nut cracking, and we know it cracks, but just walk us through the kind of things that you've been exploring sociologically as of late.
Yeah. And I think I've always been curious about the nuances of things. I mean, that's very broad, but the nuances of things and in terms of narrative research, right? How can someone's early life shape their current experiences, right? And that's one of the things that I found so constraining with doing interviews as a journalist, right? Is as a journalist, you're asking quick questions, you're getting quick answers, you're getting your quote, you're throwing in an article. That's it, right? But I love sitting down with people I love stuff like this. Like I love sitting down with people for 2 hours and like tell me everything that you want to tell me.
Yes.
And how that got you to this point, for my dissertation of being a runner, right? Being a Black woman who runs, right? Like, how did your early life experiences with fitness and like, were your parents exercising, and what was gym class like for you, and what was your health like, just, and even things that are unrelated. What was your neighborhood like? Who did you grow up with? And kind of making these connections that you wouldn't necessarily make besides just tell me what it's like as a runner, and kind of asking those sorts of things. So I'm very much into storytelling, understanding the backstory more fully, understanding the wholeness of people and kind of their full selves. And I think that's related to just a lot of my research is intersectional in the sense of thinking about how racism is more complicated than just being about race, right? And so is sexism, and so is ageism, right? And all these things, right? But these systems of oppression intersect, right? You know this. But in terms of my research about the Black don't crack stuff, and I think a lot of my questions just come out of like my day to day or conversations I'm having with a friend or something, and they'll say something like, you know what, like That's happened to me too. And someone else is saying that, but I've never seen that written about anywhere. And I'll start to kind of dig into that. And so that whole study, my parents were talking at the table one day. My mom is black, my dad is white. My mom was saying how she was she's retired now, but she was a manager in her workplace. She was a higher up administrator. And there were people at work who were like, "Oh," like they were so surprised, like you're the I don't remember her title was. You're the administrator, like you're the boss or whatever. And she was saying people seem surprised that I had grandchildren, like they seem surprised that I've been working for 40 years and all this stuff. And my dad said, "Well, maybe you should just tell them how old you are." And I was like, "What?
We
What kind
don't
of
do that.
advice is that?" And then I thought, okay, that's really interesting though. Like she looks so young and she's being treated in this really problematic way, like because she's the black woman that's in charge, but also because they think she's, I don't know, in her late 40s when she's actually in her early 60s, right? And so wanting to kind of understand how ageism, as we understand it, right, in society telling us we should want to look young and like black don't crack is this wonderful thing, right? It's this like superpower that melanin allows folks to look younger than they are, and that's what society tells us is great, right? But it doesn't always play out that way depending on who you are. So that was trying to kind of dig into how do racism and ageism or race and age intersect in ways that can actually put you at a disadvantage or make it more difficult in kind of navigating these interactions in the workplace if you look young, particularly if you're a black woman in these predominantly white workplaces. So yeah, so a lot of my questions kind of come out of my own experience or other people's anecdotally, and then like, let me investigate this. Like, someone needs to look into this. Like, this is just a lived experience I haven't seen in the literature written about yet. So I'm always on the lookout for what's the next thing. Yeah.
I love that. I have not published this yet, and I have been writing about this for a really long time. And I just, because of other things, when I first started teaching at the University of Florida as a doc student, I was teaching students that were probably 3 to 5 years younger than me. And so I had a lot of very interesting experiences connected to that, right? And even
Mm-hmm.
when I finished my doctorate and was teaching, got my first tenure track role teaching, I was at a very different institution in Florida where there were a lot of non-traditional students. And so instead of being in the classroom teaching students that were maybe 3 to 5 years younger, there were a lot of students in the class who were older than me. So that was a
Mm-hmm.
very, very interesting dynamic. And so I thought a lot about age, not necessarily in the age in the black don't crack thing, but just I think it is very, very fascinating. And so part of the reason why I love sociology, right? And I know you do too, just because there's so many interesting questions that I think partly because there still isn't, I would I think still not a critical mass enough of folks who look like us or not enough people who are asking diverse enough questions in literature
Mm-hmm.
to explore different types of questions. And so I think there's always going to be this really rich sort of diverse set of questions that haven't been asked yet, right? And so that's partly what I love about this area. Are there any new areas of research that you're looking to explore that you haven't asked yet?
Yeah, I mean, a project that I'm in the very early stages of. I just presented like the my early thoughts on it, I suppose, at an autoethnography conference. But I've thought about age and my son is neurodivergent. My son is autistic, and so I've thought a lot about a lot of things in terms of expectations of neurodivergent people and kids and how so much of it is tied up in these ideas we have about age, right? And kind of things we've run into like when's the right time to start kindergarten? Like what foods should you be eating at a certain age? What hobbies and interests do people have at certain ages? And so much of it feels so arbitrary, right?
Mhm.
Yet we think of human development as this kind of natural biological thing, but there's so many social expectations that I think we take for granted as natural, but they're not necessarily. So I'm kind of thinking about that piece. I'm thinking about being a Black mother of a neurodivergent kid and kind of navigating even things that sociologists have written about, like neighborhood where middle class Black families or middle class families of color decide they want to live, and schools and things like that. And then when you have to kind of bring in considering your child has a disability, like how does that kind of complicate friendships and what you favor in terms of schools versus diversity versus the ratings of the schools and all these types of things that are just adding kind of another layer of complexity that certainly others have explored to an extent, but I think more can be done. So I have these different ideas. We'll see how it all comes together as I've started working on issues related to that. Yeah.
Okay, so as we close, I have some questions for you that are related to Oberlin's next century that we're going to
Mm-hmm.
be asking all of our guests. So as Oberlin is going to be celebrating 200 years pretty soon, which is kind of scary, in 7 years, 2033. And as we look toward 2033, from your perspective, how can Oberlin continue to lead in intersectional research and inclusive teaching in today's social changing landscape?
Yeah. I mean, I think certainly in our current political, social context that's really devaluing research and science, continuing to be at the forefront of we're training the next generation of researchers, of critical thinkers, of scholars, and even if they don't go into research and academia, our hope, right, is that these our graduates are going into the world as people who are valuing empirical evidence and kind of leading important conversations that are led by data and things like that. That will be really important.
Second question: what does living Oberlin's values look like in sociology, in our sociology department, and
Mm-hmm.
across campus today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we have a very kind and inclusive department. I love that students from across campus and different disciplines, I think when they take sociology courses and different ideas will resonate with them. And because sociology touches on so many different areas from sexuality and gender identity to environment and political sociology and medical, right? And so many different things that it really is a space that I think students come to and feel like they can be included and they see themselves and what they're reading and what we're talking about. And so Oberlin is a place that values inclusivity and students being able to bring their full selves. I think sociology is a place where students can land in designing assignments, at least for myself. I don't know in detail on my colleagues' syllabi, but I suspect them too that they're having assignments or students are bringing their experiences into the classroom as well. And I think that's a part of what Oberlin is being accepting and listening and understanding and including people's diverse voices. So that's what we're aiming to do.
And last question: what is your North Star? So, the guiding principles sustaining your work as a scholar, teacher, and community member.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I aim to always be kind. It's such a simple word, but I think kindness, empathy, understanding, what's the most generous interpretation of why this is happening, right? And this is part of what I say to students, even in my courses, right? Like, even if you don't understand or not understand, but even if you don't remember so
Yeah.
much of what I talked about, right? Kind of this understanding that the way that people act or the position they're in society is not necessarily just their choice, right? But there's so many other things going on in their individual lives, but also in society, how society is structured and privileging or putting people in a disadvantaged spot, that I think kind of leading with empathy and kindness and giving people the benefit of the doubt, something that I aim to do just as a person and teacher and parent and all the things. Yeah.
I love that. And that is like the best way that we can end this interview.
Mhm.
So, Alicia, thank you so much for joining us. And Alicia Smith-Tran shows us how sociological storytelling brings Oberlin's justice legacy alive in classrooms and scholarship today. Her journey as alumna, athlete, and professor reminds us that innovation happens when personal narrative and kindness meets institutional commitment, carrying our 200-year story for the 2033 bicentennial and beyond. Thank you so much.